Well, I don't have any fancy intro, but hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Lost in Law. Everything is political. but so today, we've got a couple. I'm flying solo today. We got a couple of topics we want to go over. But how y'all doing? How y'all doing? I think a couple of people are going to be finishing up their streams. Ricada's probably going to be late for his, so I figure, why don't I just squeeze on in here, get this over with. I bet most of you'll catch us in the replay, so shout out to the replay crew. Hope y'all doing well. But boy, oh boy, am I excited for this one. This again, my second episode of Everything is Political. A little bit of commentary, a little bit of analysis, but let's get into it. I'm busy lining up guests. It's just a matter of getting schedules all worked out. But it's certainly not every show is going to have a guest because there's just a lot of news to cover. And guests have a way of, it'll take you 30 minutes to talk through one topic. You know what? It takes me 30 minutes to talk through one topic. So it's not that big a difference. But I can at least push myself because I never like cutting off a guest, especially when they're talking about something that people want to hear. I never really want to interrupt that flow. So, just gonna see if I'm gonna adjust my lighting here really quick. It's a little bright. I'm not normally this white. There we go. Just turn that down a smidge. Yeah. But let's get into it. So, the first thing I want to cover, as you see on the screen here, is the new legislation that the Alberta Premier Daniel Smith has brought in. And it's part of this ongoing trend across Canada to deal with the sexual orientation and gender identity issues that have been much the rage lately. So this one, of course, is tackling transgender. It's tackling transgender minors, kids who, the legislation doesn't currently. It's silent, and when legislation is silent on something, it's typically permitted. And so Alberta brought this in. Daniel Smith went and did a big show about it. She's made several statements saying, well, this is in anticipation of future problems. And she's not wrong. Among the things that, we'll read through what the substantive parts of the legislation is. At this moment, it's proposed legislation, but given that the government that she's running has a fairly safe majority in the Alberta legislature, there's not, and the party discipline here is very, very strong. You're not going to see a lot of people break ranks from the party. Most of the inner city MLAs were defeated in the last election. So some of the MLAs who may have wanted to perhaps oppose the legislation in order to save their seat, that ship's already sailed. So the entirety of Daniel Smith's government is rural Alberta, the outer suburbs of Calgary, a few of the and I don't think she has one seat in Edmonton. So, in order to form a government, you need Calgary and something else. Well, she got most of Calgary because most of Calgary is Calgary is a very sprawled out city. It doesn't take far to get into the suburbs, but once you do, you're there for well over an hour of driving. Even assuming no traffic, the ring road that goes around the city is something like what is it? Oh, I forget how long it is. It's like something like 75 kilometers or something silly like that. It's a pretty long highway, and there are actually houses that are built opposite of the highway, continuing to expand out from the city center. So Calgary, if you look at it from a satellite, it's got a huge, huge urban footprint. And in any case, because of that, it's like 1.25 million people, and the ridings roughly correlate to about 30 or 40,000 people, and so you can see Calgary's got a lot of people and a lot of ridings. So when Danielle Smith won most of the suburbs, that was what she needed to form the government because she ran the board everywhere else except for Edmonton. Edmonton is just over 1 million people. I don't think it's as large a footprint, and there's a lot more kind of outer suburban bedroom communities outside of Edmonton. So the United Conservatives take most of those seats, anyways. So what I'm saying is that Daniel Smith's majority is safe enough that you're not going to see. There's if anyone has false hope that there might be a couple of MLAs who break ranks to oppose this, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Um, this appears to be on board with the popular opinion of most Albertans. The idea that, and again, it's addressing transgender policies around minor children. So we'll have a quick look at it here through this article. If I play that, you're not going to be able to hear it because I didn't enable sound for this. But it's it's a 7-minute video, and I don't much care to take a deep dive into what politicians say from the script. In any case, yeah, you can always gauge what's going on when you see people's reactions online. You can kind of see, okay, like where's the opposition, where's it coming from, and I'll show you a good example in just a second here. But um, yeah, that's that. Here we go. So, in terms of sexual education, the province will require parental consent for students 15 and under. Um, or sorry, yeah. Um, the province will require parental consent for students 15 and under who want to change their names or pronouns at school. And so most school boards already have this policy in place, but this legislation standardizes it across the different school boards in a province. Um, in Canada, we have that strong federalist government, but education is one of the enumerated provincial jurisdictions. And so the federal government is almost powerless to kind of step in here and say, well, no, you can't really do this. Doesn't mean they won't try, but it's not going to go anywhere. Um, Students 16 to 17 years old won't need consent, but there will be parental notification. It's funny. I actually I attended university when I was 17. So if I wanted to change my pronouns at university, I might have needed parental consent. I certainly did when I needed to sign all my student loan certificates. I actually had to send them off to my parents to get those signed because yeah, I wasn't 18 yet. I couldn't sign anything. So that was funny. Um there's also this opt-in for classes that teach about sexual education, sexual orientation, and gender identity. That's where the SOGI, SOGI, gets its acronym from, or gets its, I guess, the expansion of the acronym from. It's sexual orientation and gender identity, and the push to teach these things in school. Um, so obviously the legislative change is that it's the express opt in as opposed to the optional opt out. And so it changes what the assumption is when the information is incomplete. The bill's also going to ban gender reassignment surgery for those 17 and under. So that, of course, includes mastectomies, any surgical changes to the genitals, um, and that minors will be blocked from getting access to puberty blockers, hormone therapies for gender reassignment or gender affirmation. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be any mental health support for people struggling with gender identity. It doesn't ban those. It just says that you cannot use the drugs that make irreversible changes. Now, for its part, some doctors come out and said that, well, using puberty blockers at 18 is a little late for it to have the desired effect. So, but that's again, that's going to be what's the competing interest there because um, There's no doubt that puberty blockers have a huge impact on the development of a child. I'm not sure we even know the full extent of that impact just yet. So, and of course, oh wow, this is an extra that I didn't hear about in the original package. I wonder if the media is just kind of tacking this one on. For transgender adults, they're putting together a private registry of doctors and medical professionals who specialize in this surgery. So it seems, yeah. I mean, they certainly, there's no such thing as like a transgender surgery license, but it sounds like this is getting very close to that. I don't know if it'll. I don't know if that would withstand legal scrutiny. But I wonder also if it's for the purposes of referral, so that doctors are able to, doctors who have a conscious or a spiritual opposition to this type of stuff, they should be able to, you know, uh, the law in Canada currently states that they should provide a referral to an alternative provider. That has been the topic of a legal battle in the past, and I'm not sure exactly where the current state of that battle is, but it's generally the same battle was over abortion services too. For a doctor who didn't want to provide abortion services, there was certainly legislation proposed that the doctor was forced into providing a referral to an alternative provider who would provide that service. I expect that's kind of where we're going here. Um, there was a lot of cushioning when the premier made her announcement. That was there was a ton, and you see the quote right here. I want every Albertan that identifies as a transgender to know I care deeply about you and I accept you as you are. Right, that cushion, because you know where the attack was coming from. You know where it was. Again, we're not gonna listen to that, but we're gonna read a couple of these tweets here, and I'll give you the who's who of all of these people. So this is the current mayor of Calgary, pretty strong, avowed leftist. It's weird. Calgary is one of Canada's most conservative cities, and yet this mayor, and you'll see our former mayor, uh, two tweets down, also an avowed leftist. Um, it's kind of funny. It just happens that way. The conservatives are really good at fighting each other. They're so good at it that they will often cost each other seats. And it gets very hard to advance the best candidate because conservatives will usually run like 5 or 6 best candidates. But even accounting for the vote split, Jody Gondek probably still would have won. Um, the municipal participation is really, really low. There's a follow-up story involving her too. I didn't bring an article up, unfortunately, but I will get into. Um, there's more news regarding the Calgary mayor out there that I almost forgot about when I was making this stream, and I can't believe that I did because it's like the biggest thing happening in Alberta right now. Of course, then Daniel Smith's like, "Well, you're stealing all of my thunder, so I got to do this," and now everyone's pissed at me. That seems to be a good trait of our politicians is they enjoy they enjoy pissing off the opponents. That seems to be a thing in Alberta politics. They revel, they enjoy it. They feed off that energy of angering their opponents. But and obviously this is a thread, so this news article has decided only to put one the first of the thread there. But of course Jody has the most uh I would say predictable take. So she characterizes the legislation as an infringement on human rights and the rights of trans kids. The New Democrat Party, which is the opposition party in Alberta legislature, Rachel Notley is their leader. She just announced recently that she was stepping down. Um, this, oop, didn't mean to click on that, but Anyways, um, we're seeing this narrative come up as well, that the politicians are all like, I want to, I want to address everyone who's feeling scared. I know you're scared. This is, Nate Rachel, or sorry, Daniel Smith. She's a scary person. That seems to come out quite a bit. But it's funny. She actually doesn't address the legislation or its merits. She's just kind of like, here's my shoulder, come cry on it. So I thought that was interesting from the leader of the opposition party. Again, soon to be former leader. They haven't picked her replacement yet, but she announced that she was stepping down. Naheed Nenshi is the former mayor of Calgary before Jody Gondek was elected in 2022. So he was the mayor before that, also an avowed leftist. He's a very flamboyant personality. It's kind of funny. Very flamboyant person. Uh, pretty respected mayor of Calgary. Um, he really came into his own when Calgary was hit by the floods in 2015. 2013. My goodness, it's been that long. Yeah, when Alberta had like a once in a century flooding event, because we live on the slopes of the Rocky Mountains, and our snow melts very late in the season, so it's pretty common to see snow in the passes well into June. Well, in June we had a huge torrential rainstorm because a weather system came up from the States and came in backwards, like it went east to west, which is very unusual for weather up here. Uh, Northern Hemisphere normally stuff goes west to east, but it came up in the retrograde, or it came up from the US on a curved jet stream, and it hit the Rocky Mountains and just dropped all of its rain in a very short amount of time. I think the mountain city of Canmore had, I think it was like 300 millimeters or 200 millimeters in 72 hours. And so that caused the snow still up at the higher elevations to melt at a very accelerated pace, which just overflowed all of the rivers, creeks, and just did a ton of damage. Um, that damage is still visible to this day. You'll see these gravel outwashes where torrents of raging water came down the mountains, pulling rocks the size of houses with them. Um, the scars are still there, and when you're out hiking in the Rocky Mountains, very interesting to see just what the damage, how it carved out these huge chasms in the landscape. Water's pretty strong, if you haven't noticed. You can still see bridge debris. Yeah, there's like broken bridges that were torn off. Trails and roads are still kind of sticking out of the river. It's easier just to leave it there than to go in and try and clean it up. It's hard to get heavy equipment down into the mountain valleys. So, um, but yeah, that's Nenshi was the mayor of Calgary during that time, and there's tons of pictures of like downtown Calgary just full of water. Our arena that's downtown, the Saddle Dome, was up to like its 13th row underwater. Um, and then Calgary Stampede happens in July, the very start of July. So they had only a few weeks to 2 weeks to get everything ready for like the greatest outdoor show on earth, a very large, expo that Calgary has every year. And the organizers of Calgary Stampede, the media asked them if they planned on canceling it, and he said, "Nope, we're having this party come hell or high water." That became the slogan of that year. I used to have a shirt with that, but I think it was a cheap shirt that was sold to the tourists, so I think it got ruined in a wash. Stupid, what a Gildan shirt or whatever. But so I don't have it anymore. I had to throw it out. But um, that was a funny slogan. If you ask Calgarians about "Come Hell or High Water," that's they'll remember that. That was an interesting time. So, like I said, Nenshi, towards the end of his political reign in Calgary, he got pretty unpopular, just being a leftist and doing leftist things. But there was still a segment of the population that always respected his ability to lead the city. and he left on his own terms. He basically said, "You know what? I'm done being mayor. I'm not running again. Someone else can take my place." And he left. He just left gracefully. So you always gotta respect a politician who does that. Um, Gil McGowan here is the leader, the president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, which is, of course, a labor union. The New Democrat Party, or the NDP as I call them, right? NDP leader Rachel Notley. So that is the political party that shares the bed with the unions. The NDP is considered a social democrat party, but in Alberta, they have a much less leftist bent to them. They're more center than anything else. That's not that of course is different from the federal party of the same name, who coincidentally, according to their constitution, actually share a membership list. But their leader, Jagmeet Singh, at the federal level, he's obviously quite a bit more left than Rachel Notley is politically. So that's kind of the dynamic here. But a union leader doing union things, assaulting the conservatives. And it's funny because blue collar workers that are often included in like the United Steelworkers and the Teamsters unions, they they're pretty conservative. So the rank and file workers are pretty conservative, but the union leadership is so strongly NDP, so woke. It's it can be quite something. But anyways, um and of course there's no shortage of doctors and professors, right? Political science professors. Um yeah, so the constitutional law expert, of course this is going to get challenged in court. Um Again, you cannot challenge a proposed law. You can only challenge a law that exists. And so, like I said, this announcement was the announcement that the legislation was forthcoming. So until it actually passes and becomes a part of law, you cannot take the government to court for it, outside of some limited exceptions. And so, yes, just have to wait until the law is passed. They actually have to read what's in a law before you file your lawsuit. Um, and so it's going to be in limbo until then. Um, of course, this policy is very similar to the one. If you think you've seen or heard this before, you might have seen this in Saskatchewan, where Premier Scott Moe brought in something of this similar vein. In fact, they do mention at the bottom of the article here. Um, yeah, here we go. Alberta's move come months after Saskatchewan's government also spearheaded a so-called parental rights, legislation. The bill was given final approval, preventing children under 16 changing their names or pronouns without parental consent. It also uses the notwithstanding clause of the Canadian Charter, which allows it to override the Human Rights Code and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we have a built-in notwithstanding clause in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that allows you to override certain charter limits. Not all of them. Importantly, the democratic ones are not overridden, but there are. You can limit speech. You can limit. I think it's Section 7, right? The freedom, liberty, and security of person. Um, those ones can be overridden. You cannot use the notwithstanding clause to override treaty rights with the indigenous peoples of Canada. You can't use it to override the democratic process, right? Voting. Um, I believe you can also use it on equal rights protections, which itself has its own built-in limiter clause called the affirmative action clause, which allows you to pass facially discriminatory legislation, but for the purpose of ameliorating historical injustices, as the language goes. So, yeah, our charter is a pretty strong protection with a lot of exceptions and overrides to it. So, and oddly enough, the charter does not protect property rights, but Canada also has a uh, federal Bill of Rights, and it does protect property rights. And um, the difference being is that the charter cannot be overridden by simple federal statute, whereas the federal Bill of Rights can absolutely be overridden by federal statute. Yeah, if you just in your law say Canadian Bill of Rights doesn't apply, then that's that. There's no recourse. So now most laws don't do that, and I'm wondering how many of our legislators actually know that's a thing. Um, our the federal statute called the Bill of Rights, the Canadian Bill of Rights, is it has language in it that says that unless it's specifically and explicitly exempted, this applies to all future federal legislation. But again, this was passed, I think, in the 60s. Yeah, I think Diefenbaker passed it, Prime Minister Diefenbaker. But anyways, it was kind of Canada's first attempt at enshrining human rights into our law. Because we inherited our legal system from Great Britain, we've always had the benefit of British jurisprudence. So the Magna Carta does get brought up a lot pre Bill of Rights era. The Charter came into force in 1982. Like legally speaking, it's a very it's a new addition to the Canadian legal system, and it's had a ton of case law to interpret it since then. But it doesn't have the benefit of 200 plus years of jurisprudence like the American Constitution does. So, yeah, that's the notwithstanding clause. So, anyways, Saskatchewan used the notwithstanding clause to prevent a legal challenge from their law. It remains to be seen, and Daniel Smith has not indicated either way whether um, whether she's going to do this or not. Um, my bet is that she's going to be forced into using the notwithstanding clause, but it remains to be seen. But that's that. That's the big Alberta news. I do want to follow up with Jody Gondak. I don't have an article, unfortunately. Maybe if I was more prepared for this kind of stuff, I would. But yeah, Jody Gondak is facing a recall petition, which is the first instance of its use in Alberta on such a major politician. It's been used. Oh, I think it's been used successfully once and unsuccessfully once. Oh no, sorry, no, it's never been used successfully. It's there's like 3 attempts to use it because there was a mayor who was removed, but that was under provincial legislation. Like the Alberta government stepped in and removed the mayor because of corruption, um, corruption allegations that were uh, substantial and had a basis in evidence, and so the Alberta government stepped in and actually removed the mayor. So it wasn't a recall, but it was again under the jurisdiction of our constitution. The province has power over the municipalities to do so, and so that's what happened there. But there are other recall petitions out, but they're like smaller town politicians. This is certainly the first instance of its use against a major city politician, and that would be to recall Mayor Jody Gondek. Um, Gondek is probably, I think, her most famous act as mayor of Calgary was her declaration of a climate emergency shortly after taking office. This would have been she took office in fall of 2022. And I don't remember if it was December or the January sitting of city council, but she declared a climate emergency. I don't even know what that means, but I'm sure you can guess her political slant on issues just based on that alone. We have an aging sports arena here in Calgary, the Calgary Saddle Dome. It's pretty old, and we've been trying to get it replaced. Edmonton just had theirs replaced very recently. It's a beautiful facility. I have not been inside yet to attend a hockey game, but I've certainly, I've toured the outside and some of the main, the public concourses. I just, you know, get an Edmonton Oilers ticket is not cheap. You know, it's cost you a pretty penny, and so I haven't had a chance. And I don't live in Edmonton, so I'd have to travel. I'd probably get a hotel to stay the night because I'd probably have quite a few drinks after. So it's a pretty costly endeavor. But I'm told the inside of the new arena is pretty spiffy. So uh, they managed to get that built, and of course Calgary got jealous. And I mean, our facility is aging. We lose out on a lot of high-profile concerts because of the age of our facility. The acoustics and the sound systems are just not, up to modern standards. And so we've heard there was testimony in the public hearings leading up to this that there were tour managers who were like, "Well, we'd love to come to the city. It's a big city, and there's a lot of fans there, but we have to develop a plan unique to your arena because of how poor of quality your sound system is." So yeah, I know. Hey, Sharon, good to see you. I know Rackets is on. Shout out to my replay crew, but this was the chance for me to get this done and over with. I didn't want. I'm really busy tomorrow, so I didn't want to push it off until Thursday. Wanted to get this recorded and up. Speaking of Rackets, I've asked Nick if he's interested in appearing on this show. He said he was. So it's just a matter of getting him booked, figuring out schedules. I know Nick's schedule is absolutely chaos right now, but um, I'm hopeful that well, and one of the, I mean, like I said, I'll leave it there. But I got some good reviews from the Gosney show, and so that's going to be a tough one to follow up. Gonna be a tough one to follow up. Steve, I'm gonna have Steve Gosney back again too. That was an amazing conversation with him. I hope everyone who listened to it learned a lot. It'd be a shame if not a lot of people end up seeing that show just because my reach isn't so big. So do me a huge favor. Get get the episode with Steve Gosney in front of as many eyes as you can. Share it far and wide. But anyways, so Jody Gondek is. And the other thing is, I was talking about the arena deal for a reason. So we had the deal in place to have a new replacement arena, and this was under the previous administration. And I personally know one of the lead negotiators on the project too. So, um, the info I'm getting is not like hearsay. I haven't, you know, haven't talked to the person with direct knowledge of the matter. This isn't like third and fourth or fifth degree information I'm getting, but um, the person who negotiated the initial deal originally had the Calgary Sports and Entertainment Corporation accept risk for the cost overruns. And this is info that was out in the public. Like I said, I verified the source of the info, but personally, but I'm not revealing anything here that I was privileged. That's privileged or confidential. This was out in the media. That the terms of the original deal was that the private company that owns the Calgary Flames, the NHL hockey team, they were going to be responsible for the cost overruns, and there was a ticket revenue sharing deal in which the city would be reimbursed for its initial investment in the project over, I think it was 30 years, 50 years, something like that. Um, and that was, a modern new sports arena that could also host modern rock concerts, or well, any concert, I guess. Um, so that was the deal that was in place. Of course, Gondek goes in and does her climate emergency thing, and she starts renegotiating the already signed deal with Calgary Sports and Entertainment, asking them to offset the costs to climate change that the arena will contribute to. And we're talking, I think it was a dozen, $12 million in that neighborhood, maybe $15 million of overrun. And so Calgary Sports and Entertainment says, no, you're trying to change the terms of the deal. We're backing out. And that's what they did. Thankfully, the project is still going ahead, but we ended up losing the leverage we had for cost overruns. And man, if you know anything about a government project, they always go over budget. And so now Calgary, the city of Calgary, is on the hook for the cost overruns under the renegotiated deal that Calgary Sports and Entertainment signed with the Mayor Gondek and, well, the city of Calgary, more accurately. But she torpedoed that deal that was already in place, and that was seen as a big misstep on her part. She's also just always seems to be on the wrong side of the social issues. There's a huge crime spike in Calgary, especially in the downtown area with drugs and homeless people. It's really affecting the safety of our transit system to the point where the province stepped in and forced Alberta sheriffs to start patrolling the transit system until finally the funding was increased for Calgary police to take over that role. That was it's all the death by a thousand cuts. It's these little things put together that's caused a lot of people to have a negative impression of her, and so a recall petition was launched. The recall petition, if successful, ends her term in office. She's fired, right? She gets fired. She is removed from office, and that chair becomes vacant. Now, in terms of the power structure for the city of Calgary, the deputy mayor would then step in to take over duties as per the city's charter. But that, like I said, if the recall petition is successful, she loses her job the next day. So, but the recall petition has a very high standard, a very high threshold to meet. And this goes to my earlier point about the participation rate in the municipal elections. It hovers in and around that, it never gets up quite to 50%. I think the last was like 46% or 48%, which is the turnout of eligible voters in Calgary municipal elections. There's something like, I do not remember the exact number of eligible voters in Calgary. It's pretty high though. In any case, you need. This is why I think I should have got the article ahead of time because it would have the numbers. But you need, in order to recall her successfully, you need to get it's over 500,000 signatures on a petition because it has to represent more than 40% of the eligible voting population. Is it 40 or 60? I think it's 60. 60% of the eligible voting population of the city of Calgary. And I think that eligible number is hovering in around high 800,000, low 900,000 people. And so the 60% of that is like 560,000 or something like that. The fact that not even 500,000 people voted in the election is should tell you just how difficult it will be to get this petition through successfully. But if it is successful, and there's a time limit. There's a 60-day time limit from when you announce that the recall petition has been submitted to turn in all of the petition signatures. Now, if you go to the White House's website, and there's all these petitions that you can sign on there. I want you to see in a country of 300 million people, how many of those petitions get over 500,000 signatures. I want you to go have a quick look right now and just see, when you're given a pool that large, just how difficult that threshold is to get. So the pool is 300 times less than that. Less than 1 million eligible voters in the city of Calgary. 60% of them have to sign that petition. That is quite the threshold. So it's unlikely, as a person who has studied politics and studied statistics for quite a long time, it is very unlikely this petition will succeed. You're going to have a logistics problem in a city as big and spread out as Calgary. I think they calculated you needed to get a signature, like 3 signatures every minute, I think is what they calculated. It takes maybe 2 minutes to walk between houses. We have large lot sizes in the city of Calgary. You can often walk a pretty good distance to get to neighbors' houses. I mean, it's not like Saskatchewan where you can watch your dog run away for a week, but for as large a population of Calgary is, to canvass all of that population on foot is almost impossible. You're talking about a massive, massive coordinated effort. And as far as I know, the person who launched this is just a guy. He's a business owner. He's just a guy, not very politically active. I feel like I've heard the name. Landon Johnston, I think is his name. Um, I think I've heard the name in and around the political circles, but maybe like someone who just supports right-leaning politicians, but not a big name in Calgary politics. Certainly, I don't think he fully comprehended uh, the magnitude of this operation. But he's given a couple media interviews, and he's indicated that he's also shining light on how ridiculous the threshold is, in the hopes that the government will update it and make it a little lower, make it a little easier, more realistic. Um, so that's that. That's what's going on in Alberta and Calgary news. We're gonna leave the province of Alberta and head out to the rest of the country of Canada. We'll move on to the second topic here. I guess I should have made a new banner for the recall petition, but it's not a very big topic, and it's a local topic. It's interesting, some of the political power that's at work, but again, it's something that's. Look at it this way: I'm going to be talking about the impeachment of Mayorkas later, which is also unlikely to succeed. I would say the recall petition has less likeliness to succeed than the impeachment. We'll put it that way. Um, but now we're on over to this news story. It's a recent ruling from the Canadian Supreme Court. And just, oh, you can't see that, but anyways, just doing something off screen there. But yeah, this ruling out of our Supreme Court is going to our division of powers. Indigenous issues, they're specifically outlined in our Constitution. They're outlined in our charter. They're Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. The great big book that's behind me. Aboriginal law has a huge, it's a whole subsection of law all on its own. Treaty law, stuff like that. This is probably one of the most important decisions coming out of the Supreme Court lately, just in terms of where the limits of the division of powers are. In this one, so child welfare is enumerated as being the jurisdiction of the provinces, right? Just like healthcare and education, right? Things that deal with the administration of your social life, your daily life, that tends to go to the provinces. And so child welfare is absolutely one of them. However, Indigenous people and all of their dealings are exclusively federal jurisdiction. And so now we're into a conflict. The issue here was that the federal government passed legislation that empowered First Nations to create their own child welfare systems. Quebec argued that enabling legislation is unconstitutional. It's overstepping that division of powers and going, it's stepping into Quebec's jurisdiction. And so that's what it says here, right? Ottawa overstepped the authority, infringing on provincial jurisdiction, and effectively recognized Indigenous people as a third order of government. However, the Supreme Court concluded that it was the federal government was in its jurisdiction and did not create a third level of government, but rather recognized rights already protected by the Aboriginal rights section of the Canadian Constitution. The act does not alter Canada's constitutional architecture. So that's what Quebec argued, and they lost that argument. Then, of course, UNDRIP makes an appearance here. That's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Canada takes that very seriously. We signed on to it, and you're seeing a lot of legislation that appears to in part interpret or respect UNDRIP's declarations. I mean, Aboriginal law is a very complicated topic, and I'm certainly not qualified to speak in this area. Neither as a, I'm not. I'm not even representative of Canada's First Nation population. I'm just one guy, and in terms of my own First Nations culture, I certainly do not. I'm not an active participant in my own culture. Um, it's just the way I choose to live. Who knows? Maybe I'll get more culturally sensitive as I get older, but as it is right now, I've just got more important things in my life that uh, are prioritized over my own cultural awareness. I can't even speak my own language, my indigenous language. So maybe someone will teach me someday. Who knows? Anyways, uh, and of course, all this takes place in the context of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is kind of the it was started by the Harper government, and it's the Canadian government's way of saying, like, how do we fix this? How do we, we screwed up big time. How do we fix it when it comes to the regulation of Indigenous people? Um, yeah, and here's Quebec doing damage control, saying we don't hate Native people, we just hate the federal government. So, but obviously, Quebec's concern was that the federal government passed that legislation in spite of Quebec. Right, Quebec was not consulted. It was not. It did not sign off on the law. It could. There's not an ability. Right, the division of powers exists, so it's not like Quebec and the federal government could just pass the same law together. You'd have to pass two different laws that read the same thing. But that harmony is, well, really rare ever in any jurisdiction. So this was essentially just, can you answer the question of like which overrides the other? The Supreme Court said, right, the ruling suggests that such conflicts between laws would be resolved by courts when they arise with Indigenous people protection enjoying the protection of the two clauses. Right. Um, that goes to federal paramountcy. We have, I think the U.S. has a similar concept, right? For things, you know, there there are things that states can't legislate in, and when state and federal laws pertain or cover to the same activity that is not otherwise enumerated in the American Constitution, that the federal paramountcy should apply. I think that's a, I've heard other YouTube lawyers talk about it before. I think that's the correct interpretation of federal paramountcy. In Canada, that is absolutely we're just a strong federalist country. That has always been our intention. So federal paramountcy is um, much more acceptable as a concept here legally. So the idea that when laws conflict, the federal overrides the provincial, that's just been accepted, and that's a part of. Again, that is assuming that the enumeration of the Constitution is silent on the matter, because nothing overrides the Constitution, right? If you legislate invalidly or ultra vires of your jurisdiction, then that law is just null and void. There is no conflict. So that's but um yeah, anyways, in terms of what this means for the greater, constitutional issues, I think we're going to start seeing, and any of the Australian audience will be familiar with the referendum regarding the voice. right? Adding that indigenous representation to the government through the constitutional amendment. Um, I think we're going to start seeing some of those smaller rumblings working their way up in Canada, where the indigenous people here are looking for. Uh, I don't even know what exactly they're looking for. I think it's the trend is towards self governance. Just maybe not an immunity from federal laws, but kind of a court direction that says, look, there are some federal laws you just cannot ignore, but there's many that you could. Um, hard to really predict where that's going to go. But if I was advising, like, if I was a political consultant or like a public relations consultant for a firm that's looking to, can we do a risk analysis of what's going on in the future here in this political realm? And you got to understand, like, so the show Everything is Political. There are people who get paid to render political opinions to large companies as part of their risk assessment, right? What is the political landscape? What is, what's going on? What are some of the risk factors if we take this course of action in a political sense? And that's again, it's an expression of that belief of mine that everything is political. When you're in that boardroom, every strategic decision made by your company has at least some component of politics playing into it. That said, there are people who specifically get paid. Usually, you will hire a public relations consulting firm, often consisting of retired politicians. I mean, some politicians become lobbyists, others go into public relations because, I mean, think of it this way: if you hire a former premier of a province to advise you about the risk of, investing into provincial projects, very few people are going to have the, um, honestly, yeah, a very, very small list of people bring that perspective to the table as a former premier. So, that's a pretty common thing in the world of business, especially when you're trying to get not even public projects, private projects that are just subject to environmental oversight. And so, without a proper risk assessment, the shareholders would have a cause of action that you've breached your fiduciary responsibility. And so it is absolutely incumbent on board members of large corporations. I'm thinking specifically of oil companies, where they're like, when Justin Trudeau won the election, a lot of oil companies look to their PR firms that they outsource to, and they're just like, hey, what's the risk factors of continuing to invest in this major oil project now that Trudeau's prime minister? And they would have gotten a don't invest kind of response. And that's exactly what you saw. You saw a lot of investment leave Canada with Trudeau's green revolution coming into effect. So, anyways, back to why this particular decision, what its impacts are. It's going to be limited for now, if I was advising in that capacity as a public relations expert or a political consultant, um, I would certainly say that if you're looking to partner with First Nations for major resource projects, you want to defer off to them. You want them to go to the federal government and say, "We want this," and you sit in the sidelines and say, "Yeah, we're happy to partner up with the First Nations people, and I think this project will benefit all of us." You want them to lead this because they're proving that Canada's Supreme Court recognizes the protection of the First Nations people almost above every other protection. There's very few things that override. I mean, even to the point where we're starting to alter our criminal law to accommodate the uniqueness of enforcing criminal law and reserves. Um, the oh my, I'm forgetting. What is it? Mick something. The Oklahoma case, the Oklahoma SCOTUS decision that did two things. Number one, it recognized a whole bunch of land that belongs to the Native Americans down in the States. But It was a dispute over the jurisdiction where someone committed a crime, and there was the state argued with the federal government over jurisdiction on that because a crime if I'm understanding correctly, a crime committed on Indian land by an Indian, Native American, right? Native American land by a Native American is under jurisdiction of the federal government, and you are therefore the jurisdictional court is the federal court of the United States, not any state court. If I'm understanding that correctly, I believe I have that correct. But in any case, that court case, it had a pretty big impact across the U.S. in terms of where future indigenous rights legal battles are headed. And I think this one's going to have a similar effect here in Canada, where you're going to start seeing First Nations groups assert their rights more and more to the detriment of other branches of government. So, bring it back to the risk and reward thing. If you're expecting, if you're investing into a large industrial project or a public works project, and there's significant indigenous opposition to it, the risk that the government will pull the plug on your project goes up each and every year that more and more of these decisions start coming out. The court has stopped short of giving Indigenous people the effective veto, but the duty to consult is it's very strong. It enjoys very strong protection, and it cannot ever be a consultation for the purposes of meeting your constitutional requirement. It actually has to be substantive. It has to be a true consultation as opposed to we're only doing this because we have to consultation. And so if I'm advising a company who's that's not owned by Indigenous shareholders, I would start looking at the possibility of partnering with a corporation that is controlled by Indigenous shareholders, creating a joint venture project and using that to get the approval through. Because I almost feel like because there's certain environmental issues that are the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces. But if it's an environmental issue with Indigenous involvement, I almost feel like the court will follow this decision and say, well, yeah, the federal environmental laws apply, and so the federal environmental impact assessment would be preferable over the provincial impact assessment. Again, assuming that you're doing this project on Indian lands or First Nations lands. So, very, a lot of things. That's all speculation, obviously, but I would say it's this issue. Things move slowly in the legal sphere, but give it a year, give it 5 years. I'd say give it 5 years, and we'll see where the next logical step on this path goes to. I'm thinking that it's headed towards. You're going to see a lot more partnerships with Indigenous-owned businesses in order to get these projects through, and you're going to see this turn towards self-governance, where Indigenous people are implementing virtually their own versions of provincial departments. And education is probably going to be the next domino to fall. I've already seen a few cases that come up. I'm not really going to cover any of them, but because they're dry. There's these lawsuits that involve Indigenous self-governance. They're not interesting to read one bit. They're really dry. They're heavy constitutional stuff that I really just don't understand a lot of it. I haven't taken the advanced constitutional law. I haven't taken the Aboriginal law. I haven't taken the intersection of any of those laws. So it's well above what I've been taught in law school. But I do think education is probably going to be the next domino to fall, where you're going to see this Indigenous educational regime start to take place. So, anywho, let's head on. That's enough of that. Let's head out to world news. World news. And the farmers' protests. I love coming to The Guardian, not because I like the way that they frame political issues. In fact, I really hate the way they frame political issues. I come to The Guardian because I always want to know what the other side is saying. And there was, this is one of the live blogs, so I'm just going to skip through some of the things. Um, but several European, France, um, Belgium, uh, Bulgaria, Greece, they're all having these huge farmer protests. Um and for different reasons. Not all of them are united under the same reasoning. It's quite a complicated political issue. There was it was the Dutch farmers were kind of the first major farmer well, actually I'm going to scroll down to what I wanted to read because it will have some um it'll have some context that'll help frame why I brought this up. Of course, this is starting to look very similar to the trucker protests that Canada had during during the dark days of COVID. But um, well, and the Coots blockade probably had more farmers involved than the actual truckers convoy, which was all like semi trucks. If you look at pictures of Coots, you'll see a ton of farm equipment there. That's where they kind of used all the farm tractors to block the highway. So that'd be more of the equivalent in Canada. But I heard there was a trucker protest headed to the southern border as well. But much like the one that tried to go to DC after the Canadian one, I think it's just going to fizzle out. Um, who knows? I just don't see it going anywhere. But I love when you read through this, you're just going to be like, why are you giving this guy the time of day? But bear with me. Just bear with me for a second. One of the aspects of the protest most alarming European politicians is the enthusiastic adoption of the farmers caused by a resurgent populist far right, which sees in the revolt a promising new front in its long running war on out of touch elites, radical environmentalism, and Brussels diktats. Obviously, that's a reference to the European Union. And actually, so those familiar with the Brexit debate, one of the major anti-European Union points of debate was that the European Union overrode the will of British Parliament. And there were several. Yeah, I don't know any citations right off the top of my head, because these issues are going back a couple decades now. But there were certainly issues where the European government kind of overrode what the British Parliament had put in place. Well, of course, and the mass migration was definitely a catalyst to that. Coming up from Turkey, so that's when you're referencing the Brussels diktats. That's what they're making reference to. The idea that the bureaucracy of the European Union is able to override the elected will of the British Parliament. Um, that's sort of what that issue's getting at. Again, I don't expect this John Henley here to understand that dynamic because you can already tell from that first paragraph where he's going with this. Months from European Parliament elections in which far right and anti European parties are projected to make big gains. Farming, which represents just 1.4% of the EU gross domestic product, has climbed to the top of the political agenda. So much whining here. This guy needs some cheese with that wine. Look at that. Just 1.4% of the EU gross domestic product. In the Netherlands, a new populist party, The farmer citizen movement, BBB, emerged from the nitrogen wars. Okay, so the Dutch farmer protest was kicked off because the their parliament had passed regulations limiting the use of regulating the use of nitrogen based fertilizers, which the doesn't take a genius to realize. Look, you need nitrogen in order to grow stuff. The nitrogen pollution was what they were targeting. However, the regulation of the nitrogen within the fertilizer lowers the effectiveness of the fertilizer. Lowering the effectiveness of the fertilizer. Remember, farming is not a stable. Look, if you're looking for a stable source of income, get far away from farming. And so technology has given us all of the advantages in order to in order to try to make a living out of being a farmer instead of just starving to death every 20 years when a drought comes through. Anyways, that's a gross oversimplification of the issue, but that's the context that you need to just to stay with me on this one. Channeling rural resentment and opposition to radical environmentalism. Well, there's that term again, radical. Okay. The BBB swept a board in provincial elections last year, and while it failed to repeat that performance in November's general election, it was one of the parties negotiating to form the next Dutch government with far right, anti Islam provocateur Geert Wilders. The far right Alternative for Germany, now second in the polls, has forcefully backed the farmers, as have members of Marine Le Pen's national rally in France, which has said it wants the abolition, pure and simple, of the European Green Deal. The farmers' protests make an undeniably appealing bandwagon for far right and populist parties, an extension of the culture wars that allows them to rail against what they portray as an increasingly dictatorial EU. Dictatorial. Ugh. As well as an urban international elite ignoring or attacking oppressed rural workers. So you can tell by the snark that Mr. John Henley, you can tell by the snark in this that you know, he's trying to he's straw man, he's straw man arguing. He's like, here's what they think and I'm going to attack it. Except in his mind, he thinks this is radical over the top. Like John in his own mind thinks he's making a straw man argument. My counter is that in believing he has made a straw man argument, he's actually not that far off. Yes, there is an international elite, and I would say it's not just ignoring; they are attacking the rural way of life, culture wars, the false swan song of radical environmentalism. Again, radical environmentalism has nothing to do with saving the planet. It's all money. It's all about money. If we stopped importing all of our cheap stuff from China, we'd have a pretty big impact on climate change overnight. And that's of course, in Canada here where we have, um, most of this country is covered in huge forests that absorb pollution. Our Arctic ice absorbs pollution. We have the most fresh water in the world, of all of which absorbs pollution. So we're not the ones doing the polluting, and yet we're the ones to pay for all of this. Anyways, that's not the issue, Mr. John Henley. If I can give you one piece of advice, um, there's no reason to start playing the fiddle for people who are already dancing. The people who agree with you and the tone of this article, you're not telling them anything they don't already believe. So then who was this meant for? The Guardian's a left newspaper. Who was this article supposed to target? Were you hoping that someone like me would come across and be like, "Oh man, I'm on the side of Marine Le Pen. I don't like her. I'm going to change my political opinion now." All you've done is made all of these. You've named a bunch of names. You've just made them more appealing to me because they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm railing against the out of touch elites. I'm railing against radical environmentalism. I don't like the idea of a uh I don't like the idea of this unaccountable, you know, globalist elite body having a say over domestic issues." I mean, Canada's got the same thing with the UN. America benefits in that, America gets to ignore the UN and there are no consequences. Canada isn't quite so lucky. We don't have that same position. I mentioned UNDRIP, right? Um, and because we are a trade-based economy, like there's a resource-based economy and a trade export-based economy, we need to get along with our neighbors, or we won't last very long. So, unfortunately, we are at the subject to these whims, and it's not fun. It's not fun. Not a lot of people are comfortable with the idea that an outside force is dictating your domestic policy, and that's what this is a rise up against that. So, and like the who's who of the BBB and Gerd Wilders and Marine Le Pen, like this who's. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't put Boris Johnson in there. The who's who of what they call the far right. Yeah, don't you think that's a problem? Because rather than say that um, the policies that are pushing people towards these personalities is the problem, you're just blaming the personalities. You're saying that Marine Le Pen is evil, Geert Wilders is evil, Boris Johnson is evil. Who's the Viktor Orban? Evil, right? Rather than for not even for 1 second taking a step back and saying, "Are we the problem? Like, are we screwing up so badly that we push people into the arms of others?" Huh. What a concept, right? It's the meme. So, someone do the meme of Principal Skinner. Am I the one out of touch? No, it's the kids that are wrong. Well, that's exactly how this comes off. And he's so whiny in this. You just love it. You love how much whine this guy has. John Henley. I mean, look, when I say that the media constantly starts playing the fiddle for people who are already dancing. That's how they get the clicks. This is, by lack of any better term, the outrage porn that the media has entirely embraced, right and left, equally right and left. Like if you go to a news site like Breitbart, what's Sky News? I think it's got a pretty good right leaning slant to it. Um, the Rebel, the Western Standard here in Canada. When you go to those websites, they're selling the exact same thing. One of these days, I'm actually going to pull up like an article from Press Progress and the Rebel and maybe like switch the letters and play a game where if you can decide, you can tell which one is which. But when I blank out, like I blank out the words that'll give away what side of the political aisle I'm, but just look at like the adjectives and all the verbiage that it's using, and you have to decide if it's far left or far right. I mean, that goes to the horseshoe theory of the political scale. The idea that the political scale is not this line, this linear. left to right kind of line, but it's more of a horseshoe, and at the far left and the far right have more in common than with anyone in the center. I'm certainly not the first person to say that theory. I don't know exactly who to attribute it to. I've heard it in maybe a dozen different forms throughout my journey through politics, but it's it's certainly interesting. I love reading what the other side says about my side. Now, am I far right? Yeah, probably. Am I anti-European? Yeah, probably. Where's yeah? Am I anti-Islam? Probably not. Again, define your terms. As I understand it, no, I'm not. But far right, I think maybe I'm far right. Who knows? Who knows and who cares? But uh, to someone like John Henley, my existence as a racial minority, embracing this language that he's using unironically, this is an essay in irony, right? The snark in which he wrote all of this betrays that he intends the opposite to be true, right? The double quoting of these terms, because for 1 second, do not pretend to understand what the opposite side of the political spectrum believes. And you know what? I've never seen this guy before. I don't know anything about him. If he actually is a right-wing commentator, this is why did you write it like this then? Like it would make no sense. I guess I'm making an assumption. The assumption is based on the evidence I see in front of me. But yeah, my existence makes him uncomfortable because he has to reconcile in his head. Because if based on this language, right, based on the snark, makes me think he's one of those woke liberals, right? A far leftist, maybe someone I consider to be a far leftist. He probably describes himself as a centrist. Most far leftists do. But he'd have to reconcile in his head that there exists a racial minority who doesn't hide behind his religion. Because, like I said, you watch episode 1 with Steve Gosney. I talk a lot about religious beliefs there and how they inform political beliefs. I'm hoping, like I said, I'm hoping to do a couple follow-ups on that topic, especially. But and I can't wait till I invite Joe Neerman on and have a chat with Joe about this very topic. But I don't. That's not what's informing my political beliefs. They don't come from faith or religion. So why do I believe the things I believe in? It can't be because they're valid. It can't be because I believe that the things I believe in are the optimal solutions to social issues and problems. It can't be that. Because to acknowledge that that's possible is also to acknowledge that the outcome, the desired outcome for people like me, can be achieved by political means and are a desirable outcome to any group of people. To John Henley, the idea that the farmers will get everything they ask for would cause a crisis, an existential crisis within him, because of the dogma that he's wrapped himself in the worldview tells him that this is all impossible. These are far right people. They represent such a small minority. They'll never have any political power, and all of their positions and assumptions and beliefs are unreasonable at their core. Man, oh man, just to live in their mind for just 5 minutes, you know? So, who knows? I can be persuaded. John Henley, if there is a 1 in a trillion chance that you actually see this video, come on to the show. Let's have a chat. Rebut some presumptions I've made about you, or confirm them and defend them. Because what is a political belief if you cannot defend it? It's nothing. It's hope. It's maybe it's a perverted version of faith. But anyways, onwards to the next story. To my American audience, this is the American portion of the show. Oh, God, I love talking about this topic. So, I mean, I've been watching the whole Texas National Guard issue. That seemed to have gone quiet recently. So I don't know what exactly. I think the legal battle is still ongoing, but um, I've just been watching it because this is the kind of thing that these are the kind of things that when they come across the news, I just kind of sit back and smile to myself and say, I love that my my stakes in all of these issues is purely for my own entertainment. Because man, oh man, if I actually had to live and breathe by these issues, if the consequences were such that my livelihood was at risk, I can imagine the amount of stress I would cause. I just get to sit back and be like, this is really interesting, fascinating, and entertaining to me. Illegal border crossings from Mexico plunge after a record high December, with fewer from Venezuela. Okay, so help me with this one. What happened recently that may be starting to make a dent in the desire of people to want to cross the US border illegally? Hmm. No, I can't think of anything. Arrests for illegal crossings on the US border of Mexico fell by half in January after record highs in December. um and I'm going to this news story right after. But seasonal declines and heightened enforcement by US and its allies led to the sharp decline. Acting Commissioner of US Border and Customs Protection. US authorities have repeatedly praised Mexico for a crackdown launched in late December. Heightened enforcement by the US and its allies. I got something to show you guys. Now, to be clear, I don't think the standoff at Eagle Pass is having that big of an impact on numbers. Certainly not that quickly. It's the rhetoric, though. It's that sky high political hot temperature. You have to understand. You really have to understand the illegal immigration issue. It ebbs, it flows, it wanes, it waxes. Um, the temperature rises and falls. It's a very dynamic political issue, and it will become, the biggest issue on the ballot, and then it'll quickly go to the smallest issue on the ballot. As a topic, as a political issue, it is possibly one of the most complex, involving the most moving pieces. It's up there with the economy when it comes to the number of dynamics and all of the spin-off impacts and effects it has on the rest on your other policies. So to be clear, I don't think the Texas standoff at Eagle Pass was responsible for that dent in the crossings. But with the political temperature so high, the Eagle Pass standoff is the same consequence as what is driving the lower migration. Those farmer protests in Europe, you hear a lot about some of the, like, Americans love laughing at Europe's lack of freedom and how the European government encroaches on its citizens all the time. You can get arrested for a tweet. They like to laugh at the UK all the time for that. If that if what Europeans consider normal was to be immediately transposed into the States, you would have many more Eagle passes. What I'm saying is that it has to get a lot worse for it to get better. Every politician knows. Every Democrat politician knows if the illegal immigration continues to get out of hand, it will cost them politically. Illegal immigration is the Democrats' up version of abortion for Republicans. Okay, you had that Dobbs decision come out from the Supreme Court, and it probably cost you quite a few seats in that midterm election 2022. But now that it's law, right? How hard is that going to be to overturn in the foreseeable future? Right? So it's done. You made the sacrifice, the political sacrifice to get that done. Great, but it still cost you. It cost you big. It hurt a lot. It's an issue that had to be addressed. It's an issue that, I feel this at the very core of my person. It's a personal conscience issue, and it needs to be addressed. Illegal immigration, for what it's worth, I think is that same level of a political football for the Democrats. It's an issue that they want in their very core to be as out of control as possible because it goes to who they are and what they believe in. But they know that when it gets too far out of control, it's like the opposite of the restriction, right? So the more restrictive abortion equals the less restrictive U.S. border, right? Think of it as like a give and take sort of thing. The less restrictive the U.S. border is, the more the Democrats benefit from it in terms of alignment with their personal beliefs. But it costs them politically. So if you understand where I'm coming from on that, then you understand why the Democrats are doing everything they can to cool the temperature on this issue and bring it back to issues that they can win on, right? Women's rights, just human rights in general, right? They can win on those issues. They usually win with the American public. The parental rights issue is an interesting one because it seems to buck the trend. It's the exception, right? Governor Youngkin over, what is that, Virginia? Yeah, Virginia. I think it's Virginia. Or is it North Carolina? Anyways, yeah, Governor Youngkin, who, a lot of political analysts say that his victory, I guess it was an upset victory. It was sort of expected by the polls. Like, everyone saw from the polls that he was supposed to win, but it was still an upset in that, if you were 4 years back, you never would have predicted a Republican would have won governor in that state. But it's attributed a lot to that parental rights issue, especially where became revealed that the FBI was keeping tracks on people who were protesting this whole like SOGI issue at the school level. And of course, Youngkin, I mean, say what you want about him and his performance today and whether he's disappointed you or not, but if you're going to upset someone in a traditional Democrat stronghold, you're probably not running the deepest red Republican there. You're running someone that the average voter is like, I don't disagree with him. I think, I can vote for him. I can vote for him. Right? It's like someone like Trump is one of the best things to happen for election turnout because he galvanizes the opposition just as much as he galvanizes his own base. So when you're in traditional Democrat strongholds and you don't want the Democrats coming out in full force, you want to run a candidate that they are okay losing to. There are some losses that you're okay taking, and if your candidate is one of them, that's the play you make. Again, you're talking to someone who politics is a competitive sport for me. And so I like to win. I hate losing. So would I rather win with someone who compromises my principles, or would I rather lose with someone who and I mean there are core principles that you never go back on, obviously. But when you're more flexible on issues that just aren't as important to you, right? Would you rather win with that person, or would you rather lose with someone who aligns perfectly with you? Because the person you lost to is probably less aligned. So, the difference between governance and this pie in the sky policy ideal. Anyways, on to our final topic of this evening. I'm going to finish up with this, the Mayorkas. I'm hoping it's saying Alejandro Mayorkas. Well, now I'm just thinking of that. I'm just thinking of that Lady Gaga song. Alejandro. But let's get that up. All right. So, the first impeachment of a sitting cabinet minister in 150 years. Nearly 150 years. First cabinet secretary. In Canada, we have cabinet ministers. The executive are also intermingled into our legislative body. So all of our ministers sit in our parliament. They can vote on legislation and bills, unlike in the US where your secretaries are they're not congressmen. They can't be congressmen or senators. If they are selected for that position, they have to resign their seat. So I call them cabinet ministers out of force of habit, but they're cabinet secretaries in the US. So this isn't just a quick thing. This is a quick thing because I want to talk about why the Republicans are posturing for a clearly losing position. Because if you look at it, this goes to the Senate. You need that 2/3 majority in which the Democrats control the Senate for the impeachment. Guess what? Not happening. Right? Dead on arrival. But there's two things you're doing here. And my fellow my fellow lawyers on YouTube, my fellow lawyers on YouTube, I want you to see if you can follow this line of logic. If you've ever cross-examined a witness before, if you're a litigator and you've cross-examined a hostile witness, cross-examinations are presumed hostile, but bear with me on it. There's different schools of thought as to whether you ask the person if they did the thing you're trying to impeach them on. Right? In the criminal context, did you hit the accuser? Right? Were you drunk when you got in the car? Did you think you were drunk when you got in the car? Right? Sometimes, or I guess if you're doing defense cross-examination, right, you're you're confronting the accuser. Did you hit first? Because you want them to lie to you. Again, and so of course there's different schools of thought, but the one that I think, I haven't started practicing yet, but I think the one I'm going to end up adopting is look me in the eye and lie to me straight through your teeth. If I can impeach it, I will. I don't always have the info to do so, but I certainly want you to look me right in the eye and lie to me. And so I'll ask you directly the question, of course, following the rules of evidence and the proper questioning procedures. Um, I'm going to ask you, are you lying? And that is that similar vein is what's going to happen here. The Republicans want the Democrats to, or yeah, they want the Democrats to look them in the eye and say, we don't think he's done anything wrong. The state of the U.S. border is acceptable to us. They want look me in the eye and say that you endorse what is happening. The reason being is you've seen those public opinion polls, and they're all saying that the majority of the U.S., the majority of the American voting population wants action on the southern border. So this posturing is going up to the Democrats and saying, look me in the eye and tell me that this is your stance, your position on the U.S. border. Everything is political, and this is the posturing. Of course, it has no chance of succeeding. That's not why. They actually want it to fail, because the failure, they can go back to the donors and say, we tried to hold them accountable, but them pesky Democrats uh, who have signed off, they have endorsed President Joe Biden's approach to the southern border. It's also a good chance to find out who are the Republicans voting with the Democrats. Let's get those names down on a paper. Let's get this recorded vote. And let's look for the people who voted no to the impeachment and have an R beside their name. Let's identify those people. Maybe we already knew who they were, but let's see. And then let's also see, let's also have a look at how well the Republicans can keep that caucus in line. See, this is not something we have a lot of experience with in Canada, because Canada has very strict party discipline. Typically, if you vote against your own government, they throw you out of the party soon after. In fact, if a cabinet minister votes against the government, that actually kills the government. That is a lack of confidence of the executive. That actually kills the sitting government. The Governor General dissolves Parliament if the cabinet ministers vote against the Prime Minister. I don't think that's ever happened in Canadian history. Typically, what happens if you end up with a split in that regard, the minister will resign their position rather than vote against the government and bring the government down. Um, that has happened. I do think ministers have, ministers have been either removed from their post or resigned over their opposition to government initiatives. Um, the prime minister is able to do what's called a cabinet shuffle and move people that they think they're going to cause them problems out of their cabinet positions. So, I mean, the threat has been there, but it's never actually been, that provision has never actually been triggered. But in the U.S., of course, where you have people going crossing party lines all the time, Senate and at the House, this was certainly a test of Mike Johnson's ability to keep the caucus herded in line. There were several very good reasons why this political stunt is a good idea. I do believe most voters will not see through that. Your political diehards, all of your political commentators, do see through it. They see it as superficial. They see it as self-serving. They see it as all these, all these ways to describe it. But the political stunt was a very safe one to play, right? It's not going to cost you any. This won't cost the Republicans one vote. Well, maybe one vote, but certainly not any movable amount of votes. It won't cost them at all. And yet there are several benefits that flow from it. So when you have a low risk play that gives you some measure of benefit, that's where you get your political theater. That's where you get these stunts, these shows, the showmanship. Oh, so that's that. Hey, I think we've reached the end of the show this evening. I had a lot of fun going through some political news with everyone. I'll be back next week. We'll do episode 3 of Everything's Political. I'm hoping to line up a guest. Not ready to say who it is yet. Just again, I gotta make sure that the schedule applies. As far as time slot goes, I did go very late today because I had a conflict with some other things going on. I think the time slot I really want to focus on is maybe around that 6 o'clock, 8 Eastern, 6 o'clock Calgary time or Mountain time. That window seems to work well for me. I know I did the show with Gosney on a Monday. Obviously, today's show is Tuesday, going and stretching into Wednesday. So I'm not. I haven't quite set the regular schedule yet. I'm still building this show up too. This is so. Like I said, I ran the full course of what I thought I could do with my original Lost in Law video series, just chronicling my journey through law school. The problem is that there's only so many cases that come up that are interesting to talk about. And as a law student, there's the authority and the weight that my opinions have don't count for anything. There's nothing that backs it, right? It's like throwing a punch without twisting your shoulders or your hip, where you just got like a loose elbow and you just go, eh, right? It's not going to hurt very much. Whereas if you rotate into that, now you got the whole body weight behind it. That's going to hurt a lot more. Well, I don't have that. I don't have the metaphorical weight. I have plenty of the physical weight, but not much of the metaphorical weight behind that punch. So, anywho, that's where we're headed. Like I said, I'm still going to try and figure out my optimal time slot. I think the Mondays are going to end up working out for me. They seem to have the least conflict with everything going on law school wise. So sound off in the comments too, please. Or on the scrolling thing at the bottom, my show email is there. Let me know. Agree? Disagree? Want to fight about it? Let me know. Man, I love the idea that I can pull in emails of people who are like, "You are an idiot. You are misinformed. You are ignorant. And here's why. And here's my arguments." I love the idea that I can pull that email in and say, "Okay, so here's how I address this point, and that point. That's a pretty good point. That wasn't such a good point. Now you're just arguing emotionally." So who knows? Maybe that's where we end up with this show. Who knows? I certainly want the audience interaction. For those of you who joined me from Gosney's subscribers, maybe I should have put this at the start of the show, but welcome to you guys. This is who I am. This is what I do. If you want to see more, let me know. Like I said, I am happy to have Gosney on again. Anytime. Go tell him. That's the thing. Those of us who are creators, if someone hits us on Twitter, hits us up, or comments or super chats or anything like that and says, Hey, I love that show you did with that guy, Tim. You should do another one. The first thing Gosney's going to do is email me and say, hey, my audience has been asking for a follow-up. Are you open to another collaboration? And of course, my response would be like, absolutely, Steve, get in here. You have an open invitation whenever you want. But when we see that, we we don't make any assumptions as to, okay, so this person wanted it, that must mean everyone wants it. But when someone is willing to put themselves out and say, this was really fun, I liked it, and I want to see more of it, we see that. We don't always respond to it. When I was doing Drex's show, we had way too many comments coming in to always address or respond to all of them, but we do see it. And for the most part, every reasonable request is considered. And so if you, the audience, want Steve back here, go tell Steve that you want him back here. I can invite him, and I will invite him, but the easiest way to facilitate this kind of stuff is when the audience starts asking for it. Same with Joe. Like I said, I'll have even even Destiny or Pisco or the people. I really would look forward to talking with Nate the lawyer. I got to reach out to Nate sometime, because I do think that Nate and I we could have a spirited discussion, agreeing to disagree at the very end, but being able to articulate our positions on issues, and both being members of visible minorities, our unique takes and perspectives on what we've witnessed from that perspective and the way people treat us. Oh, those are things I'd love to get into with him, right? Like with Drex, it was Drex is not a race baiter, and I'm not. That's not to say that Nate is, and I'm not either. But it is interesting learning about everyone's lived experience. Because when you are a visible minority, at some point, someone's going to say something racist to you, whether or not they actually mean it from an ill intent, or they're just meaning it as a joke, or it's one of your own personal friends, and they're just saying it because to try and be edgy or funny. But what is that experience? And I would love to know. I'd love to know what Nate's experience is. I'd love to know. I'd certainly love to know what informs his political beliefs, where they come from. But that's true for everyone, right? It's the kind of person I am. I have to deconstruct whenever I'm talking to another person. It's like, where are you coming from on this? What is the source of your feelings, your thoughts, your beliefs? So, with that said, I will sign off here. We'll see you guys next week for episode 3. Until then, stay frosty, everyone.